Jefferson Fisher ma'am. One of the most powerful ways a narcissistic husband keeps control is through something that is both subtle and devastating at the same time: gaslighting. It doesn't start with the obvious lies or the big denials. No, it begins in small, almost unnoticeable ways. Maybe he says, "You're too sensitive," after you bring up something that hurt you, or he shakes his head when you recall an event and insists, "That's not how it happened. You're remembering it wrong." At first, you might brush it off. You might even laugh about it, thinking, maybe I am overreacting. But over time, those tiny moments start stacking up. And before you realize it, you're questioning not just your memory, but your entire sense of reality. That's the quiet destruction gaslighting causes. It makes you doubt yourself to the point where you rely on him to tell you what's real. What's so dangerous about this kind of manipulation is how gradual it is. If he shouted in your face from day one, if he openly lied about every little thing, you'd notice. You'd push back. But gaslighting is patient. It's a seed planted slowly, watered by repetition, and hidden under just enough charm and affection to make you second-guess your instincts. A narcissistic husband knows exactly how to play this game because the goal isn't just to win the argument, it's to make you believe you shouldn't even argue in the first place. Think about what that does to a woman's confidence. Imagine being told over and over again that your feelings are wrong, your memories are flawed, your perception is broken. After a while, you start apologizing for things you didn't even do. You begin prefacing every sentence with, "I might be wrong, but," because deep down, you've been conditioned to believe that you probably are wrong. That's the heartbreaking power of gaslighting. It doesn't just control the moment, it controls the entire mindset. And when you're living in that fog, it becomes incredibly hard to see the truth. The husband will twist conversations so skillfully that you walk away feeling like you're the one who messed up. He'll deny saying something, even though you clearly remember it. He'll insist that you misunderstood, that you're imagining things, that you're being dramatic. And because you love him, because you want to believe the best in him, you accept the possibility that maybe you are at fault. That misplaced grace is exactly what he feeds on. But here's the truth you need to hear. Your memory is not broken. Your perception is not the problem. Your feelings are not invalid. What's happening is a deliberate tactic designed to strip away your ability to trust yourself. Because once you stop trusting yourself, you have no choice but to trust him. That's where the control comes in. He becomes the gatekeeper of what's true and what's false. He rewrites the story, and you're forced to live inside his version of it. The scars of gaslighting run deep. Long after the argument is over, long after the silence in the room has passed, you find yourself lying awake at night, replaying the conversation in your head. You think, maybe I didn't say it that way. Maybe he's right. Maybe I'm the problem. That cycle doesn't just break your confidence. It breaks your spirit. And yet many women stay silent because they don't have words to explain what's happening. How do you tell a friend, "He makes me feel like I'm crazy," without worrying that they'll look at you the same way he does? That isolation makes the control even stronger. But let me remind you, confusion is not love. Doubt is not respect. Real love doesn't force you to question your sanity just to keep the peace. Real love doesn't need you to shrink so it can stand taller. And when you begin to recognize the pattern, when you start naming it for what it is, that's when the power begins to shift. Naming it gives you clarity, and clarity is the first step toward freedom. Gaslighting is not a reflection of your weakness. It is a reflection of his fear. Fear that if you stood firmly in your truth, if you trusted your own voice, he would lose the control he clings to so desperately. And that's exactly what must happen. Because the moment you begin to trust your own reality again, the moment you look in the mirror and believe your own reflection more than his words, that's the moment you step out of his shadow. And when that day comes, he will no longer control the narrative of your life. Another tactic that often goes unnoticed in the beginning, but becomes painfully clear over time, is isolation. Narcissistic husbands know that as long as you have people around you who see your worth, people who remind you of who you are, their control is threatened. So what do? They slowly, almost quietly, build walls around you, not physical walls, but emotional and relational ones. They want to be the only voice in your life, the only influence, the only opinion that matters. It doesn't start with forbidding you from seeing your family or friends. That would be too obvious, too direct. Instead, it begins with little comments. Maybe you tell him you're going to lunch with a friend, and he sighs and says, "Do you really need to spend time with her? She doesn't understand us." Or when you plan to visit your parents, he makes a joke about how they treat you, planting just enough doubt to make you hesitate. And over time, those doubts grow. Soon, every time you want to connect with someone you love, you second guess yourself. Maybe he's right. Maybe they don't really support me. That's the brilliance of the manipulation. It feels like you're making the choice. It feels like you're the one pulling back, when in reality, it's the influence of his subtle discouragement. Before long, you start declining invitations, canceling plans, making excuses. You tell yourself you're just tired or you're too busy, but deep down, you know it's because you don't want to deal with his reaction. And that's exactly what he wants. You see, isolation doesn't just happen through words. It also happens through behavior. Maybe every time you come home from seeing your friends, he's moody, cold, or passive-aggressive. He might accuse you of not caring about him, of leaving him alone. Or he may flip it and say, "I just miss you when you're gone." And because you love him, you start sacrificing your connections with others to keep him happy. But the truth is, he's not missing you. He's monitoring you. He's making sure that no one else has the chance to remind you of your strength, to remind you of the life you had before his control. What makes this kind of isolation so painful is that it doesn't just cut you off from others. It makes you feel guilty for even wanting those connections. You start believing that choosing your family, your friends, or even yourself is somehow a betrayal of your marriage. That's how deep the control goes. It convinces you that loneliness is loyalty and distance is devotion. And the longer it continues, the smaller your world becomes. The laughter with friends fades into memories. The comfort of your parents' home becomes a place you rarely visit. Even the hobbies and activities you once loved begin to disappear because every time you try to reach for them, you're met with resistance. Soon, the only person left in your orbit is him. And when he is the only voice you hear, it becomes dangerously easy to believe every word he says. But here's the reality: your worth is not measured by his approval. Your connections are not weaknesses, they are lifelines. The people who love you don't pull you away from your marriage, they remind you of who you are within it. And that's why he wants them gone. Because when you're reminded of your worth, when you're surrounded by people who lift you up, his control loses its grip. Isolation is not love. True love celebrates your relationships. It encourages your growth It wants you to be surrounded by joy. A healthy partner doesn't feel threatened when you spend time with your friends or your family. They feel secure enough to let you be yourself. And if someone is working overtime to cut you off from the people who love you, it's not because they value you too much. It's because they fear losing the power they've built over you. The truth is, the people you've been distanced from, the ones who love you unconditionally, they haven't stopped caring. They're still there, waiting, ready to remind you that you are not alone. The silence and the separation may feel heavy now, but it is never permanent if you decide it isn't. And once you begin to reclaim those connections, once you start letting trusted voices back into your life, the lies lose their strength, because the antidote to isolation is community. And when you step back into the presence of people who truly see you, his control begins to fade like shadows in the light. Another way control shows up, one that often hides in plain sight, is through money. Finances are more than just numbers in a bank account. They represent freedom, choices, and security. And a narcissistic husband knows that if he can control the money, he can control almost everything. Because when you don't have access to financial independence, it doesn't just limit what you can buy. It limits the life you can build without him. Sometimes it starts under the disguise of care. He might say, "Don't worry about working. I'll take care of everything." At first, it sounds like love. It feels like security. You may even feel grateful, but slowly the tone shifts. What was once offered as generosity begins to feel like a leash. Because when all the money flows through him, every decision you make has to be approved. You begin to feel like a child asking for permission instead of a partner sharing a life. Other times it's more direct. He may insist on managing the bank accounts, monitoring every purchase, questioning every expense. If you spend a little too much, he makes you feel guilty. If you ask for money, he makes you feel like a burden. And before you know it, you stop asking altogether. You learn to live small, to suppress your needs, to avoid conflict. That's exactly where he wants you. Silent, dependent, and convinced that survival depends on his willingness to provide. Financial control isn't just about restricting what you can buy. It's about restricting what you can dream. If you've ever thought about leaving but found yourself paralyzed by the question, "How would I even survive on my own?" That's not by accident. That's the trap he's designed. By keeping you financially dependent, he ensures that the cost of freedom feels too high, too overwhelming, too impossible to reach. And so many women stay, not because they want to, but because they feel they have no choice. But let's call this what it really is. It is not care. It is not protection. It is not love. It is control disguised as provision. Because real love doesn't make you beg for basic needs. Real love doesn't use money as a weapon to punish, reward, or manipulate. Real love shares resources. It doesn't hoard them. And here's the deeper wound that financial control creates. It doesn't just trap you physically, it can make you feel small inside. It chips away at your confidence, your sense of capability. You start to believe you aren't strong enough to manage on your own, that you aren't capable of making financial decisions, that you wouldn't survive without him. But that's not the truth. That's the lie he wants you to believe. Because the truth is you are capable, you are resourceful, and you have within you the same strength that has carried countless women through the impossible. Financial freedom may not come overnight, but it begins with a single decision, the decision to believe that you deserve it. And once that belief takes root, you start to see possibilities where before you only saw walls. You begin to notice the skills you've ignored, the opportunities you've dismissed, the strength you've buried. And step by step, you realize that money doesn't define your freedom, courage does. It's important to remember this: financial control thrives on silence. It survives when you keep your struggles hidden, when you don't ask for help, when you convince yourself you have to face it alone. But the moment you begin to speak about it, to reach out for support, to let someone you trust know what's happening, that's when the control starts to crack. Because control cannot survive transparency. The grip of financial dependency is strong, but it is not unbreakable. And the first sign that it's weakening is when you stop apologizing for your needs and start standing in the truth that you are worthy of more, worthy of choice, worthy of independence, worthy of a life that is not chained to someone else's approval. So if you've ever been made to feel like you can't survive without him, remember this: he didn't create your worth and he cannot take it away. You carry inside you the strength to rebuild, to reclaim, and to rise. And the day you choose to believe that is the day his control begins to lose its power. One of the most painful and confusing forms of control is when love itself is used as a weapon. Because love is supposed to be safe. It's supposed to be steady, something you can lean on when everything else feels uncertain. But in the hands of a narcissistic husband, love becomes conditional. It becomes a tool of manipulation rather than a gift of connection. And that is what makes it so damaging, because the very thing you crave, the thing you deserve, is the same thing being twisted to keep you under control. At first, the love feels real. In fact, it often feels overwhelming. He showers you with affection, compliments, attention, so much so that you start to believe you found someone extraordinary. This is what many call the honeymoon phase, where everything feels perfect. But it doesn't stay that way. Slowly, the love starts to disappear when you don't comply. Suddenly, affection is given when you behave the way he wants, and withdrawn when you don't. It's subtle at first. Maybe you notice that when you voice an opinion he doesn't like, he grows cold and distant. When you challenge his behavior, he pulls back physically, emotionally, or sexually. But when you go along with him, when you stay quiet, when you bend yourself to his will, suddenly the warmth returns. The smile is back, the affection is back, and for a moment, it feels like the man you first fell in love with has come back too. This back and forth creates a cycle that's hard to break, because every time he pulls away, you find yourself working harder to win him back. You start changing your behavior, shrinking yourself, silencing your needs, just for the hope of feeling loved again. And when he does give it, it feels so rewarding, so intoxicating, that you start believing that maybe if you just keep trying harder, he'll stay that way for good. That's the trap. He's not actually giving love, he's giving rewards. Rewards for compliance, rewards for silence, rewards for staying under control. And let me tell you, there is nothing more exhausting than trying to earn something that should never have had conditions in the first place. Love is not supposed to be a test. It's not supposed to be something you achieve only when you're perfect or obedient. Real love doesn't vanish when you speak your truth. Real love doesn't punish you for having needs. Real love doesn't require you to trade pieces of yourself in order to keep it alive. The emotional toll of this kind of manipulation is heavy. Over time, you begin to believe that you're unworthy of unconditional love. You start to think, maybe this is all I deserve. Maybe if I was different, better, stronger, quieter, more patient, he would love me the way I need. That internal dialogue is not born out of truth. It's born out of control. It's born out of someone twisting the most powerful human emotion into something that feels like both a lifeline and a leash. What makes this even harder is that outsiders don't always see it. They see the charm, the affectionate gestures, the public displays that make it look like a picture-perfect marriage. They don't see the moments of coldness behind closed doors, the silence that stretches like punishment, the affection withheld like a bargaining chip. And that can make you feel even more isolated, like no one would believe you if you spoke up. But just because they don't see it doesn't mean it's not real. Here's the truth you need to hold on to. Love is not supposed to hurt like this. Love is not supposed to make you feel small, controlled, or silenced. Love does not vanish when you have needs. The love you deserve is steady, safe, unconditional. It doesn't use affection as a carrot on a stick. It doesn't withhold intimacy as punishment. It doesn't make you beg for connection that should be freely given. And when you start to see that what you've been given isn't love at all, but manipulation dressed up as love, you take back your power. Because the greatest act of strength is realizing that you don't have to settle for conditional affection. You don't have to prove your worthiness to someone who is using love as a chain. You are already worthy without changing a single thing. The moment you stop trying to earn love that was never real and start believing that unconditional love exists and that you deserve it, that is the moment his control begins to lose its grip, because real love cannot be controlled, and neither can you. One of the sharpest weapons a narcissistic husband uses isn't shouting, it isn't threats, it's criticism. Not the kind of constructive feedback that helps you grow, but a constant stream of little jabs, subtle digs, and comparisons that slowly chip away at who you are. It's death by 1,000 cuts, and the tragedy is that most of the time, those cuts are disguised as jokes, helpful, observations, or even suggestions meant to make you better. But what's really happening is much darker. He's deliberately eroding your sense of worth so that you begin to see yourself the way he wants you to. Small, inadequate, never enough. It doesn't start with the obvious insults. He doesn't immediately call you names or tear you down. Instead, it begins with a remark about how you load the dishwasher, how you dress, how you laugh a little too loud. Maybe he says, "You really don't know how to do that, do you?" With a smirk. Maybe he compares you to someone else, casually dropping, "You should be more like her. She knows how to take care of her husband." On the surface, it seems minor, but over time, those comments accumulate. And the more they pile up, the more they sink in. The effect is slow, but it's devastating. You start to second guess the way you look, the way you talk, the way you act. You begin to apologize for things that don't even require apologies. You start editing yourself before the words leave your mouth, afraid that whatever you say will be turned into another punchline or another reminder of how you don't measure up. And before long, you're not even living as yourself anymore. You're living as a muted, watered down version of who you used to be. And that's exactly what he wants. Because the weaker your confidence becomes, the stronger his control grows. Criticism is not just about making you feel bad in the moment. It's about shaping your identity over time. It's about making you believe that you're not capable on your own, that you're not good enough to be loved, that without him you would crumble. And if he can convince you of that, then he never has to worry about you leaving. Because he's already convinced you that you're nothing without him. But let's pause and look at the truth. No one deserves to live under constant devaluation. No one deserves to feel like their very existence is a problem to be solved. The voice in your head that tells you you're not enough, that isn't your voice. That's his voice planted in your heart, replaying on repeat. And the first step to breaking that pattern is realizing that his words are not your truth. They never were. The danger of constant criticism is that it begins to shape not just how you see yourself, but how you allow yourself to be treated. If someone tells you every day that you're unworthy, eventually you start believing it, and you start accepting less than what you deserve. That's why it's so powerful when you finally recognize the pattern for what it is, a strategy of control, not a reflection of reality. Imagine this for a moment. If a stranger walked up to you and said half the things he says, would you accept it? Would you believe it? Probably not. You'd recognize it for the cruelty it is. But because it comes from someone who claimed to love you, someone who promised to cherish you, it cuts deeper. That betrayal makes the words sting more. But betrayal doesn't make the words true. It only makes them louder. Real love does not need to tear down in order to stand tall. Real love doesn't feel threatened by your confidence, your joy, your voice. It celebrates them. It nourishes them. It reminds you that you are more than enough exactly as you are. And here's the part he doesn't want you to realize. The very things he criticizes are often the things that make you most powerful. The independence he mocks, the voice he silences, the confidence he chips away at. Those are the things that threaten him the most. Because if you ever believed in them again, his control would shatter. So don't confuse criticism with truth. Don't confuse cruelty with love. And don't let someone else's insecurities become the lens through which you see yourself. You are not the names he calls you. You are not the comparisons he makes. You are not the flaws he magnifies. You are more. You've always been more. And the moment you reclaim that truth, the moment you look in the mirror and see yourself without his words hanging over you, is the moment his power begins to crumble. Because no amount of criticism can control a heart that finally remembers its own worth. Control doesn't always look like yelling. Sometimes it's quieter, more calculated, but just as heavy. Narcissistic husbands know how to use fear and intimidation in ways that don't always leave bruises, but leave scars just as real. And the silence. They know how to weaponize even that. It's not always about the words they say. Often, it's about the words they withhold. And that silence can feel louder than any shout. You've probably felt it before. The room suddenly shifts after you say something he doesn't like. He goes quiet. His expression hardens. The warmth vanishes. And without a single word, you know what's coming. That cold silence is a punishment. It's his way of saying, you stepped out of line, and now you're going to pay for it. And so you start scrambling, trying to fix it, trying to apologize, trying to fill the silence just so the tension lifts. That's how the cycle works. He doesn't even have to raise his voice. He just has to withhold connection until you bend. But other times, the intimidation is more visible. The sudden anger, the raised tone, the slammed door, the clenched fists, the look in his eyes that says without words, don't push me any further. And it doesn't matter if he never lays a hand on you. The fear he creates does the job for him. Fear becomes the leash that keeps you quiet, that keeps you cautious, that keeps you walking on eggshells every single day. The most dangerous part of this kind of control is how unpredictable it feels. You never quite know what will set him off. One day, it's a small comment. The next, it's nothing at all. That unpredictability makes you live in constant anticipation, constantly scanning the room for signs, constantly adjusting yourself to avoid triggering him. And before long, you're not even living freely anymore. You're living in survival mode, shrinking yourself to stay safe. And yet, from the outside, it doesn't always look like abuse. There aren't bruises to point to, no obvious evidence to explain. How do you tell someone, he scares me with silence? How do you explain that the tension in the air feels heavier than any physical blow could? That's why so many women stay quiet, because fear isn't always visible, but it is always powerful. But here's the truth. Real love does not require fear. Real love doesn't make you afraid to speak, afraid to breathe wrong, afraid to simply exist as yourself. Love does not come with intimidation as a condition. Fear is not respect. Silence is not care. And anger is not passion. These are tactics of control, not signs of love. The silent treatments, the cold shoulders, the slam doors, they're not about you. They're about him needing to dominate the emotional space you live in. They're about him reminding you that he decides when peace comes back. He decides when the warmth returns. But here's what he doesn't want you to realize. When love becomes something you're afraid of losing, it stops being love. It becomes control dressed up as affection. And when you begin to name it for what it is, you begin to take its power away. Fear thrives in the dark, in the silence. But the moment you speak it out loud, the moment you say, this is not love, this is intimidation, the grip starts to loosen. Because the truth has a way of breaking chains that fear alone can never hold. You are not meant to live in fear of the person who vowed to love you. You are not meant to walk on eggshells in your own home. You are not meant to spend your life guessing whether today will be warm or cold, loving or silent, safe or explosive. Love is not supposed to feel like a gamble. And while fear may feel like it owns the moment, it does not own you. It never has. Deep down, beneath the silence and the intimidation, you still carry a voice. A voice that deserves to be heard without punishment. A voice that deserves love without fear. And the day you choose to trust that voice again, the day you decide that fear will no longer dictate the way you live, that is the day as control finally begins to end. Because fear only works when you let it silence you. But when you rise, when you refuse to be defined by intimidation, when you stand in the truth that love should never make you afraid, then no silence, no anger, no intimidation can ever hold you down again.